So I'm very excited to be talking to you about how access control can really make a difference at your building and what we're doing at ButterflyMX to make that a reality. So first, here's kind of our agenda, right? So I want to give a little bit of attention. What is cloud-based access control? You know, what should you be thinking of that can be part of an access control platform? And then how exactly does it save you some money, right? And then, because obviously that's going to come down to your NOI. Same thing with how can it help you drive some incremental revenue that you weren't seeing before, right? So first thing is, what is access control? Well, look, this is a diagram of a building, right? It really covers every single door and kind of way that people get in and throughout the building. With ButterflyMX, you know, as I said, we started with the smart intercom that goes at the front of the building. And, you know, we were letting in the UPS guy, we were letting in the FedEx guy. So very early on, you know, our customer said to us, well, can you provide a package room that can be an endpoint for those deliveries? So the package room was really our first additional product after the intercom. Why? Because obviously, you know, 5-6 years ago, package delivery was the #1 kind of thing that took up the on-site team's time. It's still important, but obviously there's a lot of solutions now in the market. And we swiftly started going into things like elevator controls. And in the last 2 years, we've now added your traditional key fob, right? So on all your amenity spaces, your telco room, maybe your leasing office, that little piece of plastic that you have that dangles off your keychain, we've added controls for all the key fobs and keypads throughout the building into the ButterflyMX ecosystem. And what that means is it's all controllable via our mobile app, right? Then the next thing that we added was, you know, vehicle readers and vehicle gates. You know, I'd say something like 1/3 of the properties we now serve, you know, especially in the Southeast and Southwest, are all, you know, gated communities. They could be multifamily, they could be HOA, right? And where, you know, residents and visitors drive up to a parking barrier, whether it's an arm or a roll-up gate, and we provide seamless access because, you know, once you're part of that ButterflyMX ecosystem that's operating at a property, no matter what door somebody is approaching or using, you can either use the mobile app or it can automatically open if it's a vehicle gate. And then the last thing is, of course, it's the unit doors, right? So we now integrate with a variety of different smart locks, because if you start with a delivery at the front of the building, right, or you have somebody like a dog walker or a friend who's coming to see you, let's get them all the way into the unit if that's what the resident wants. By the same token, let's say a resident has a maintenance request and there's an outside vendor coming into the front of the building. Let's get them up the elevator. Let's get them into the unit. So this is really what we call our unified access platform. It's an end-to-end solution that covers every door in the building. And what's important about that is it opens up a lot of functionality and efficiency, okay? And once you basically connect all the different access points, right, in the entire building, it gives you the ability to start to automate certain workflows. And I'll give you an example of that really quickly. We just launched something called amenity space reservations. So what does that mean? Well, typically when you rent an amenity space or want to use an amenity space, if access is restricted, you email the property manager, and then they have to look at the calendar, and then they'll email the resident back, and there's all this back and forth. Well, we can actually control access into that amenity space. So what we said is, let's write some software that sits on top of this unified access platform that allows the resident to just simply go into the mobile app, look at a calendar, look at the different spaces, and make a reservation. And then you can set it up where the property manager approves it, or it's just all automatic. But that's an example of when you have a single system all under one platform. You can start to say, hey, how can I reduce the amount of friction? How can I make things much more efficient for both the resident as well as the property manager? Then the second thing is, you know, from the beginning, ButterflyMX was one of the first cloud-based access control platforms, right? That's really how our intercom worked, right? You have the touchscreen at the front of the building. It's communicating with our cloud servers. Everything is just getting automatically updated. And what that allowed us to do is really control the property remotely. You know, if you're a property manager, you don't have to be on site. in order to open the door. You don't have to be on site in order to be updating the resident directory listings, because a lot of that is also automated. Essentially, we integrate with Rent Manager, and so if I have a resident who is moving in with Rent Manager, their name automatically comes to us on their move-in date, and it's automatically expunged on their move-out date. So cloud-based access control really opens up a lot of ability to drive efficiency as well as operate the building remotely when it comes to access control. So, I think I touched on this, at the beginning of the webinar. Right now, with rents flat or even declining in some areas, there's a lot of focus on expense reduction in order to drive NOI. And I think it's important to understand why are things, kind of on the expense side of the ledger going up. It's obviously has a lot to do with the labor market, right? People have been aging out of multifamily for some time. It's hard to hire replacements, right, with lots of experience. So even if you do have the ability, in terms of higher wages, you might have a problem actually finding good people to come in because of the tight labor market. Then, of course, the other thing that folks have been dealing with has been the skyrocketing insurance costs, right? For the past 3-4 years, for a variety of reasons, the multifamily industry has been experiencing much higher insurance costs year after year, and there's not a lot you can do about that. So really, you have to look for other areas of expense reduction. Same thing goes with package delivery. Like we're just leaning in more and more into e-commerce, so there's really no end in sight in terms of the amount of time and effort that package management is taking at the property. And then, of course, the other thing is, and I think this is especially important in markets that may experience some overbuilding in the next few years, is, every time you have a vacant unit, you're looking at a $2,000 or $3,000 cost to turn the unit as well as to market that unit, right? So that's another thing which I think in some areas is just one of the drivers behind the higher expenses that are being seen in multifamily. And so how can access control help offset some of those things? Well, it's really in a number of different ways. I think I already touched on the fact that, with integrations with a property management platform like Rent Manager, right, all the directory updates that people were typically used to doing manually or having to hire their, security vendor to come in and update the resident names, that can now all be done automatically and actually on a continuous basis, right? So as soon as the property management platform is updated with a new name, what happens is that comes to ButterflyMX, and that name of the resident only appears in the directory or only has the ability to use the mobile app, to open the amenity spaces or the front door or their apartment door on their move-in date, and then move-out date automatically expunged. The other thing is, as you probably been thinking about, is when it comes to the apartment door locks, right? One of the main reasons people have been opting for electronic and mobile-based, apartment locks, smart locks, is because you don't need to spend any money rekeying them, right? Traditionally in a building with metal keys, when somebody moves out, the maintenance guy has to go basically take out the old cylinder, put in a new cylinder. You may actually have a rekeying machine somewhere on site, but all of that takes a lot of time, a lot of money, right? Keys get lost, by the way, sometimes when residents are there, so you have to rekey in that instance, right? And so instead, smart locks, you don't have to rekey anything. It's basically you wipe the old lock in terms of the credentials of the resident who moved out, and now you just issue new residents to the new or new credentials to the new residents who move in, and it's all automated, right? And that's really something. It's a routine operation which previously required a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of time, a lot of expense, right? Because it can cost anywhere from $50 to $75 to rekey a lock, and now it's just all done via change in the programming. And of course, a few other things are what happens when you feel like you don't need to have a third shift, or you want to use certain things like self-guided touring to supplement the on-site staff, right? So self-guided touring is a great complement for those people who want to come after hours when the leasing office is closed, and you don't have to extend those hours, but instead you can use something like self-guided touring. By the same token, somebody's coming back for the third or fourth kind of walkthrough to take a look at the amenities, to take a look at the apartment they're interested in, the leasing person doesn't need to accompany them on that tour, but instead can allow them to self-tour. And that's, I think, where self-guided touring is seeing a lot of traction in the post-COVID area, which is it becomes something that can complement the on-site team, or obviously in some cases, it can actually, if you don't have an on-site leasing office, it can replace that. And, I think the other big trend, and this again goes back to expense management, is what people have been talking about for the last 2 or 3 years in the industry is how can they use a strategy like centralization, right, to manage a bunch of co-located properties much more efficiently, right? So you set up a pod of, a leasing pod, you set up a maintenance pod, and those pods are now actually providing those services to like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 properties, instead of having individual on-site teams or on-site leasing offices and on-site maintenance teams. There's a way to kind of get some economies of scale through centralization, right? And obviously the last thing that I'm going to touch on is just the reduced costs, right? The mental energy it takes when you're managing one unified system versus 3 separate systems, right? Instead of having to go back and forth between one database, another database, and a third one, right? Your intercom, your amenity spaces, and your apartment doors, you have one system where it's all interconnected. It's much easier for the on-site teams to kind of learn about those and manage those. So those are really the main drivers in terms of how access control can save you money. And I just want to talk a little bit, shout out to Rent Manager, right? So, with Rent Manager, what we've done is we have this integration with their PMS system. So every time a resident gets added to Rent Manager on their move-in date, they come into ButterflyMX and they can use all of that functionality. Because ButterflyMX is a mobile app-based platform, right? You've eliminated the need to kind of create the key fobs, to kind of create hard metal keys, because residents can now get into any part of the building where they're allowed using the ButterflyMX mobile app. So it's a much more efficient way to manage the property using Rent Manager and ButterflyMX. And it's that instant ability when you get to the property. You don't need to go to the leasing office in order to start moving in. Once you're credentialed on your move-in date, you can get anywhere a resident's able to go, right? And by the same token, on your move-out date, you're automatically unable now to use the mobile app, and it just saves a lot of time for the property managers in terms of having to manage those things, as well as it's just a much better experience for residents. I wanted to kind of break down some of the things I was talking about in terms of the benefits of a mobile-based access control solution. I already touched on the rekeying of the locks, but when you think about it, right, when you have a building with traditional metal keys, right, it's a huge kind of time management and physical asset management challenge, right? You have to keep track of those keys. You could be using an expensive key tracking system, right? When they get lost, you basically either have to, send somebody to the hardware store, or you have to buy an expensive cutting machine that stays on site. All of that gets eliminated when you're using a mobile-based access control system, because everything on site is electronic. Everything has a chip in it, right, which is controlled by the mobile app. And the ability for a resident to get into an amenity space, to get into an apartment, is all going to be controlled via a centralized dashboard that gives them the access authorization for that particular apartment door lock or that particular amenity space, right? And so it's very, very easy to kind of set up time blocks. The amenity space is only open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. You can do that from the centralized dashboard, right? Then it impacts everybody, right? The other thing is, obviously, again, we talked about the apartment door locks, but I can't tell you like how often we've heard from, maintenance folks. They spend so much time rekeying locks. And so they're kind of the strongest advocates, I can tell you, in terms of going from traditional metal keys to electronic locks. And once you have that, again, it opens up a world of opportunities in terms of how you can manage the property much more efficiently, right? Once everything is on a single platform and a cloud-based platform, it allows you to use that dashboard, right, to control late night access or to eliminate late night access without actually having to have somebody go on site. You can do all of this remotely, right? And the important thing about that is when you don't have to worry about granting access or how do I staff the building at night in terms of getting, making sure somebody has to be on site, but I can do it remotely, you basically free up the on-site team's time to focus on the more important things. And as we know, the most important things are resident retention. And if it's a new property that's in lease up, getting to stabilization, right? And that's where they can spend all of their time and all of their focus, achieving those goals, creating that sense of kind of personalization and community, right? Which is going to get somebody to want to stay at the property, right? So kind of as part of that, that's where things like self-guided tours also come into play, because really what it allows you to do is if somebody doesn't have the ability to get to the property during the time when the leasing office is open, you're now giving them that optionality, right, to come when it does work with them. So you're essentially meeting your customer, right, where they are. And so they can come to the property. And by the way, I think what's we've also seen is there's a lot of great positive feedback, because when you show up at the property, you're seeing a touchscreen at the front of the building, right? It immediately creates this tech amenitized feeling, which is so important to, I think, especially millennials who really operate a lot of their lives using their smartphones, right? So now all of a sudden the building is representative of how they want to live their lives. And so self-guided touring, again, it can be more efficient in terms of allowing people to come after hours. It also ends up complementing, the on-site team, even when the leasing office is open, for that person who comes back for the second, third, or fourth tour. And, they don't want to necessarily, do the tour with a leasing agent. They'd rather go explore it on their own. So I think, this is one of these things where the unified access platform, starting at the front of the building or starting at, the vehicle gates that get you into the parking area, then throughout the building and into the units, this is where that unified access platform can really provide a great experience for the new prospect, but as well as create a lot of time savings for the on-site staff, which they can then use for other activities to drive retention and drive lease up. Centralization, again, I think that's been a theme at the NMHC really for the past 3, actually 4 years. Some people started to think about this, I think, during COVID. But, when you set up these end-to-end access solutions, it really then facilitates the ability to set up pods to manage multiple properties, right? So for example, if you have a maintenance pod, right, the only way you can do that is if the maintenance team doesn't need to meet like property vendors on site, right? Instead, right, at every single building. Instead, what you can do is with a centralized access control system, if you have somebody coming to repair a rooftop air conditioning unit, you can give them an access credential that gets them into the front of the building at the intercom, then up to the roof deck, because it's all on the same access control system. So having a single access control system just makes that ability to manage your vendors so much easier, right? It allows you to also implement the things like self-guided touring, which you can kind of say is a part of things like centralization. So the key here, again, is the ability really to manage these properties efficiently and remotely and set up these automations, which you wouldn't be able to do otherwise without an end-to-end access solution. And it's all done, obviously, from a single dashboard. And so all your buildings can be managed from that one dashboard. And then, of course, I think this is a really important thing that's often overlooked is, every on-site team is using multiple systems in order to, drive the leasing process, do marketing, manage maintenance requests, et cetera. Having a single access control system, right, throughout the entire property, allows the team it frees up more mental space. Number one, they're going to learn how to use the system much more efficiently. It's not going to be a burden to them. And then secondly, it allows you to automate that task, which makes being a property manager a much easier thing to do at the property versus having to constantly manage 3 different systems. And okay, I'm going to issue this guy a credential to get in the front of the building. Then I have to go my second system for the amenity spaces to issue a credential to get them into another part of the building, right? So an end-to-end solution allows you to have a much easier to manage property, and the benefit there falls to the staff, and in terms of change management, in terms of managing the system on a go-forward basis. So, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the revenue side of the equation. So, question to ask yourself is, okay, a lot of people talk about monetizing the amenity spaces, and that's a great idea. And I think we're seeing that more and more in multifamily. And the thing about that is, though, how do you do that in a way that doesn't require the on-site staff to be there to monitor who gets in and who gets out? Well, with an end-to-end platform, right, and something like our amenity space reservation system, number one, you're able to control access to a space only when people who have paid the fee to get into the space or pay the monthly amenity fee for any of the amenities, right? You can restrict that access to folks who have paid the fees, whether it's part of the monthly fee or a special one-time fee because somebody's holding an event. So by having a centralized access system or cloud-based access system, you're now able to easily give those credentials to the people who've paid the fee and stop people who haven't paid the fee from going in. Same thing with self-guided touring, right? It's a way to free up the leasing side, but it really ultimately drives revenue on the top line by allowing more people to get into the property, right, without having to increase spend on on-site leasing teams. And then, of course, as I already touched on, millennials use their smartphones for a lot of things to control their lives. And when you now start to include the access control of the building, their ability to get in to the different areas where they want to get into their apartment, get their friends into the building, right? You're creating this like very tech amenitized experience that really fits in with the rest of their lifestyle. So it's now the way they manage the building and the way they manage access in the building is on par with all the other things that they're doing in their life. And so that can be a real game changer because it allows you to increase rents for that functionality. And again, just to kind of touch on these things, the amenity space reservation, it's very, very easy. Really, all you have to do is install, keypads and readers at those amenity spaces. They connect automatically to our platform. Residents then go into the mobile app. They pull up the amenity reservation for the rooftop lounge. They can then book that space. Right? Again, you're taking out the on-site team from having to have all that back and forth between the resident, checking the calendar, and so on. It can all be automated. Self-guided tours, I think we already touched on this, but again, this is a level of automation which a unified access platform allows you to have in the building that frees up the on-site team's time and really makes the experience something that's meeting the prospect where they want to be, right? And that's obviously part of the way they would live their life in the building as well. So it's a great kind of first look on the experience of being a renter at a property when you implement the unified access solution and the complementary self-guided touring. And then, as I said before, what we're seeing is, the amenitized buildings are something that meet kind of the way millennials are living their lifestyle. And what's very interesting is NMHC surveys have shown that lots and lots of residents, over half, are actually willing to pay some amount of money to have a tech-forward building. So, by putting in the end-to-end access, by creating this kind of one platform that allows you to operate the building more efficiently, there's actually like an ROI, like a concrete ROI in terms of the fact that people value it so much, they're willing to pay for it on an ongoing basis. So it can be an area that you haven't monetized, is this great experience that actually provides much more efficient living and managing for the property managers.